Orders of the day, numbers 1 to 4.
Accident Compensation, Financial Responsibility and Transparency Amendment Bill, Committee Stage. Passports Amendment Bill Number 2, Committee Stage. Tariff Free Trade Agreement between New Zealand and the Republic of Korea, Amendment Bill, Committee Stage. Construction Contracts Amendment Bill, Committee Stage continued.
I declare the House in committee for consideration of the Accident Compensation, Financial Responsibility and Transparency Amendment Bill, the Passports Amendment Bill Number 2, and the Tariff Free Trade Agreement between New Zealand and the Republic of Korea Amendment Bill, and for further consideration of the Construction Contracts Amendment Bill. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker. The House in committee for the consideration of the Accident Compensation, Financial Responsibility and Transparency Amendment Bill, the Passports Amendment Bill Number 2 and the Tariff Free Trade Agreement between New Zealand and the Republic of Korea Amendment Bill, and for further consideration of the Construction Contracts Amendment Bill. Members, we turn first to the Accident Compensation, Financial Responsibility and Transparency Amendment Bill. And the question is that Part 1 stand part. I call Sue Moroney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to rise and speak to Part 1 of the Accident Compensation, Financial Responsibility and Transparency Amendment Bill. Mr. Speaker, the Labor Party will be exploring Part 1 in fine detail because this is the part of the bill that we have the most reservations about, actually. It's the part that is supposed to give the financial responsibility and transparency, the main title of this bill, its oomph and its content. But we've become quite concerned about what happened to this bill as it went into Select Committee, and with Part 1 in particular. Because again, just like what the government did with workplace health and safety, the bill, when it went into Select Committee, was in one form, and when it's come out, there have been some amendments that have caused us concern. The amendments that have come out the other end of the Select Committee have caused us so much concern that I have proposed an amendment during the course of this debate, which I hope will be supported by all parties, to make it clear about the financial responsibility and transparency of this amendment bill. So the parts that I'm referring to is that in Part 1 of the bill, what it does is it introduces a new process for ACC levy setting. And in setting that new pathway, I guess one of the most fundamentally new parts is that whereas currently ACC starts this process and does the consultation with stakeholder parties and has some guiding principles that guide it in terms of the recommendations it makes to government, what this bill brings in is, I guess, a political overview of that before ACC even get to consider it. So what the bill does in Part 1 is it says that the Minister actually gets to set out the parameters. The Minister will set out a funding statement that will guide ACC. Sounds like quite a good idea. However, when you take into account that the history of this particular government is that it has, and by its own admission, in the past, been overcharging ACC levies to the tune of about $350 million a year in order to, as the former Minister for ACC, Judith Collins, put it, get to surplus, then this is giving a lot of political discretion for the government to give direction to ACC. Now, there are some good amendments that the Select Committee made to try and make sure that this didn't become a political lever that can be used even more overtly than what the current government did to prop up its failed attempt to get surplus. The Select Committee made some recommendations that in doing that, in setting that funding statement out, the funding policy out, that the Minister had to go to the stakeholders and consult over that funding policy to start off with. That, I think, will give some comfort to those of us who are concerned about the government's agenda, that there will be a wider scrutiny on that, and I think that's a good amendment. So that's not the Select Committee amendment that we are concerned about. However, The funding principles that ACC has relentlessly stuck to throughout the years, the funding principles of when it sets the ACC levies, of ensuring that there is levy stability, the guiding principle that they have used to ensure since 1999 that the purpose of setting the ACC levies was to fully fund the lifetime costs of injuries and accidents, and the other principle that they have used to ensure that there is sustainability in the ACC scheme going forward. All of those things are now transferred into this legislation. However, they went into the Select Committee in a shape where it said that those funding principles must be adhered to, that they must be adhered to by the government or by the minister when considering the levy setting. However, when they've come out of the Select Committee, there have been some small but important changes. No longer must the minister consider all of those three important principles, but it's been watered down to being a should consider. And that alone would be not quite so concerning if it were not for the government's contention that they have carte blanche to do whatever they want in the ACC levy setting because the ACC Act, Mr Chair,
Sumaroni.
the government contends that it can do whatever it likes with the ACC setting process because there is a part of the Act that says that the government, that the minister can consider or can take into regard the public's interest in setting ACC levies. That is the bit of the ACC Act that the current government has used to excuse itself for setting ACC levies artificially high in order to do something that has nothing to do with ACC, in order to try and make its books look as if they are getting into surplus by their own admission. And that's what we resile against, Mr Chair. But it's not only the Labour Party that resiles against that, it is indeed also Business New Zealand and the Council of Trade Unions and a number of other submitters who said, and Business New Zealand were very clear about this, they said it should not be allowable that the government sets ACC levies with a view to propping up a fiscal surplus. And the Labour Party agrees with that view. And Mr Chair, that is the reason why I have brought forward a supplementary order paper that deals with their concerns. Now, we had a discussion about this in Select Committee, and it is the view of the national government members that the use of the minister's regard of the public interest with regard to setting ACC levies is only to do with the public interest about ACC itself. It's not broader than that, it's about ACC. So I'm calling on those government MPs who gave us that assurance in Select Committee to vote for my amendment, because in fact that's exactly what my amendment clarifies. It clarifies that when the ACC Act talks about the public interest, it is talking about the public interest with regard to reducing accidents and injuries in the workplace, on the sports field, in the home, wherever they may occur. This amendment is important because that gives this Parliament some comfort that when the government has moved to water down those three guiding principles of how ACC levies are to be set, that is not a signal that they intend to keep on using ACC levies to prop up their failed attempt to get to surplus, because that is not what is intended by this Act. And I take the members at their word, it's not what the national government members on the Select Committee believe it to mean, and I'm now calling them to account for that by seeking their commitment on voting on my amendment, which does in fact exactly that and would make it absolutely clear that the public interest, when it comes to talking about setting ACC levies, is about reducing injuries and accidents. It is not about things so far removed from the responsibility of ACC as ensuring that the government can try and get to its surplus. Its surplus, by the way, that it's failed to get to so far. We'll wait and see whether its promised surplus is ever going to happen, but they've failed to do that despite the fact they've been using inflated ACC levies to prop that up. Now, those are my words, But it wasn't me who made that assessment. It was Judith Collins, the former Minister of ACC, who said very clearly in setting the levies in 2013 that one of the factors she took into account, and that has continued to the current minister, one of the things they've taken into account is getting to surplus and the broader fiscal situation that the government finds itself in through its own sloppy fiscal management. So, Mr Speaker, I want to urge all of the parties to consider voting for that supplementary order paper. I hope that the government MPs will find themselves in a position where they can, because, Mr Chair, if they can't, then I think that is a very clear signal to the rest of New Zealand that this government intends to, in our view, misuse ACC levies, to set them artificially high to ensure that they can actually prop up things like their failure to get to surplus. That is not what the New Zealand public requires from the ACC system. That is not what the public would see as in its interest when it comes to funding ACC levies. What they want them to be used for is to reduce injuries and accidents at work, and that's what my supplementary order paper makes absolutely clear. Mr Chair, today the Minister made a statement which we'll come to when we debate part 2.
Mr Chair.
I call the Honourable Nikki Kay.
Mr Chair, I'm very, very pleased to speak